Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. This episode is a recording from a panel discussion I had the privilege to attend in December 2020. The panel was organized by the Nordic RSE network, a network that promotes the work of research software engineers across the Baltic Sea and Nordic European countries. It was part of a 3-day workshop which, due to the pandemic, was held entirely online. The subject of the discussion, befittingly, was research software engineering careers and their position in academia. Samantha Wittke from Aalto University chaired the discussion, but before we go into the recording, let me set the scene quickly. The role of research software engineers has popped up across the globe in recent years, but building a career out of this is not easy, and aspiring RSEs often face obstacles in their career paths. It's a story you might have picked up from previous episodes. For one, the role may not be officially recognized or funded, career paths may be limited, and the work they do may not get recognition it deserves. Each participant of the following panel discussion have their own story to tell, but they also offer perspectives how we can build a sustainable future for research software engineering. And so here now at the recording, and let's start with introducing the panelists.
My name is Gudrun Lotze. I'm an X-ray physicist, and that means that I perform experiments at the synchrotron.
Patrick.
Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Honvall. I am in the background a theoretical physicist. I just defended my PhD, but I have for a year now worked as an RSE in the Swedish quantum computing project, and I work with many different groups, partly as a consultant in terms of software development. I also write codes myself, code review, and try to help people to get involved in version control and sustainable software development.
Thank you. Next up, Keijo.
Hello, my name is Keijo Helianko. I'm a professor of computer science at University of Helsinki. So my hat here is that I'm also a chair of a national expert panel on high performance computing in Finland.
Thank you. Ella.
My name is Ella Bingham, and I work as the head of research services for Aalto University. So it means my role in this panel is to be the elderly lady from University Central Administration. My own background is actually in computer science. I used to be a researcher for a very long time in data analysis and artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Next, Konstantin.
Hello, my name is Konstantin Stadler. I'm leading the Industrial Ecology Digital Lab here in Trondheim. My background is as a researcher in botany and in neuroscience. And then I started here at the Industrial Ecology program. We're basically doing quantitative sustainability science. So there's a lot of data processing. And during my postdoc and researcher position here, I grew more and more into a role of managing data and helping other researchers writing software. And at one point then we established a digital lab, and I'm now leading that together with Radek, who's also on this, so also joining here today.
Thank you. And Jeremy, please.
I'm Jeremy Cohen. I'm a research fellow based at the Department of Computing in Imperial College London. I'm a computer scientist by background. I've been doing research software type work as a software engineer and a researcher for several years. And I'm currently a research software engineering fellow with a fellowship that's funded by the UK's Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and very welcome. So for those of you who are already RSEs or who want to be, what was the biggest point of resistance that you have noticed to becoming an RSE or to get into that area? Yes, Jeremy.
So I can take that to start with. I mean, I think probably the biggest challenge has been in terms of the funding to support RSE roles. Of course, people have been doing, I think, RSE type work in research roles, but I think there are challenges with that, and we perhaps recognise more now the challenges with that. Particularly, if you're in a research role, but your main focus is on developing software, that I think presents problems for kind of long-term career progression. I think probably funding and the career progression options link very closely together there.
Ella?
So what I see is the main challenge is actually this budgeting that Jeremy also mentioned. So you need to know the tricks in university budgeting, so to make this a reality. because you might need to post these as support for overall digitalization, in which case you might have some top level funding from the university top management, or then you can do the other way around, like we did in Aalto University. Like within department level, we outsource services that a research project might need. So we do have these kinds of service roles within the university, and now these research software engineers can become another point of outsourcing. Really, it's a budgeting trick, and you need to negotiate and find the right, find the right motivation for the upper management also to commit to this.
Patrick.
Yeah, everybody mentioned funding, and I want to add to that too, that's one of the main obstacles I've found. My RSE employment is temporary, and as it looks like right now, the only way for me to continue that would be to formally accept a postdoc position instead of an actual permanent, semi-permanent or RSE position. But I also faced other obstacles in the form that there lacks kind of a recognition of the crucial role that an RSE fulfills, kind of as a hybrid to bridge different disciplines, in particular computer science and a particular research field. This is something I've only seen personally being recognized at the research institutes like Max Planck Institute, CERN, and so on. But at my local universities, you have the researchers, they do their job. You have the IT specialists, they do their job, but you don't have somebody that speaks a common language. And it's not properly recognized that this role is also needed.
Konstantin?
Yeah, just as direct response to Patrick, I think for us here at Industrial Ecology, this situation is different because we're situated in an engineering department, and that's also the reason why we call ourselves a lab. So all the others are having physical labs, and they basically got financing from the department for this, and we kind of felt that we are missing out on this, then led to the establishment of this lab. I think everybody is happy about having this digital lab, especially because we are this interface of understanding what the researcher wants and what's available on ET infrastructure on the university and on the national level. The biggest obstacle I see currently for us is more like everybody is happy about having this RSE and so on, but not everybody is happy about the best practice guidelines or something we want to establish, because they are often seen as not waste of time, but something which is not high on the priority list, like something like testing or documentation and this stuff. So this is then often outsourced to us, but we of course are not the ones writing the documentation if we're just helping setting something up on a HPC cluster or something. So raising the awareness in the research is one of our big tasks here actually.
And yesterday there were many comments about the difficulty of non-publication focused research specialists. So how can now universities promote a greater diversity of career path there? Konstantin?
That's a big problem actually, because we are falling somehow in between. I'm actually currently in a process of switching from a researcher position to an engineering position, partly due to that I kind of hit a ceiling which what I can accomplish in a researcher position, because I'm judged on publication outcomes. Whereas an engineer, I'm more judged on how much I support research. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. But I think also the path of an engineer is not really fitting the research software engineer track in terms of job description and let's say levels of engineers and something like so. So we lack these levels of software developer, software architect or something. So this is not officially recognized. And we are working on this to have this established here. But of course, it would be really great to have this on a national or even greater scale on the universities.
Ella?
As a university, we can provide careers in service units within the university. So the careers for people having a researcher background, like I believe most of us in this panel also have made this shift from a researcher career into a service. So actually those kind of people who work in a service position with a very service-oriented mindset, but still they have their own researcher background, those kinds of people, they enjoy very great respect within the customers. I mean, now the customers are, of course, other researchers within the department, because we know what research is all about and what are the challenges that the researcher is facing. We indeed have similar roles already within the university in in the service organization.
Good.
Yeah, I would like to add that everybody needs a little pet project. So in this service role, one RSE should be allowed to do science and research because he works interdisciplinary. So he needs to, or she needs to be in contact with researchers. So I see this maybe not so much as a service role, but there must be time for a pet project. And also if you have only a temporary contract, one needs to do this because in the end, often you are judged on publications, and that is then in that respect a disadvantage. Thank you.
Okay, you.
These RSE roles indeed are quite different from traditional researcher roles and traditional IT support personnel. The RSE is really involved also in the research projects, and this is something that is not yet fully established in our university. We're trying to get these kinds of positions started, and we have some initiatives in some campuses, but this is not kind of reaching out to all parts of our university. Another interesting thing we've done now is actually we're collaborating also with the industry. So we have actually some collaboration with NVIDIA, where they have a professional researcher who's involved in things like porting codes to GPUs and kind of pushing their own agenda, but at the same time being involved in university research. So this is through NVIDIA AI Technology Center that we have established between the universities and NVIDIA, and that's quite interesting to have also kind of industrial people involved in the research and supporting researchers doing research projects.
Jeremy?
And building on what the other panelists said, a really, really important aspect here is really just kind of understanding the institutions, understanding the importance of how software is a really important contributor to research. Because I think without that, the career paths obviously have developed quite substantially in the last few years with the emergence of research software teams and so on. But I think there's still so many researchers who are writing software as part of their kind of everyday work that the software is often kind of hidden behind the research work. And so I think there's a really important progression to be made in kind of really recognizing how the software is a key aspect and how it contributes. And I think there are initiatives such as the DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which is, I think, trying to make a real sort of contribution here to try and improve the options for recognizing different types of research outputs. And I think that can really help. But I still think there's a way to go. But I think ultimately, RSEs slightly fall down a gap between the kind of traditional, university central IT type roles that support the IT infrastructure and the research itself. And I think that there have been obviously great strides forward there, but I think there's still a lot of work to do.
Patrick?
I think that the codes become more complicated. I think it makes sense to refer to them kind of as numerical experiments, and we should therefore recognize the work that people do on developing codes in a similar fashion to how experiments and methodology is developed. If you look at least in my field, researchers who focus their attention on building experimental setups and writing documentation and so on for this is recognized. They can publish papers on their methodology development. And we should have the same kind of possibilities for people developing codes so that all of this work that they put is recognized. For example, when I say numerical experiment, we should maybe also hold the codes to the same standard as a experiment, in the terms that the code should be open access, that everything you do should be reproducible, because that's a core tenet of science. In an experiment, you put a lot of effort into testing that the equipment works, that the experiment is reasonable. And the same testing standards are not always promoted, at least not for scientific software. Maybe if we try to promote it as numerical experiments, that will open more recognition of the hard work that a lot of people are doing.
That was very interesting that Keijo said about the NVIDIA collaboration. Do you see a role for industry in the RSE community for university collaboration or independent work?
So far it has just started. We've been doing this maybe for 6 months now or something in that order, but it has already ended up in several research papers with actually having the NVIDIA people as collaborators in the research paper. And that has really worked out because, well, the person on their side has a research background and is basically an RSE working at the NVIDIA side. So that has worked quite nicely. Of course, then the companies have to have a motivation to do this. With them, it's worked so far.
Okay, then we go to the next question. What would or should a career as an RSE look like in your opinion? Jeremy?
Really, it would have to be something that, and it has to be something that provides strong opportunities for career progression. I think something where there's an opportunity to focus on the software work and to have the outputs that you produce as a software engineer be the key things that are recognized, because at the moment I think too many people who are doing software work in research are being judged perhaps on other metrics. Yeah, I think from my perspective, the most important thing would be ensuring that the work that you output, that there are sort of sensible metrics for measuring your outputs, and that kind of what you're working towards from that perspective, and also that there is a strong career path where you can actually progress through and move on from, if you choose to, onto a sort of more of a software management role, but equally to move into more senior hands-on development roles as well within the research community.
Ella?
Maybe approaching the question from another angle, I would like to stress that it's a service role, not a role of an independent researcher. So you need to make a mental shift from your older researcher self-image. So you then become a person who is serving the needs and motivations of other people. What you do is useful for the others if you can digest the needs of others, and also if you can communicate what you are doing in a language that the others are understanding and the others appreciate. So that's a mental shift we need to do, and it is actually a similar mental shift that almost anybody who has a researcher background and is moving outside research work, like if they move to industry or other positions, they also need to make this similar move of not so much serving their own motivations and wishes, but those of the others.
Some roles, such as bioinformatician, for example, have already gained some recognition as this kind of middle ground. So what can RSEs learn from them? Or do you have maybe any other success stories in other fields? Gudrun?
Maybe I would like to point you in the direction of synchrotrons. They recently got upgraded, meaning that they are producing more and more data, and they will users will be overwhelmed by the data. And people like Stanek Mate, they are already working on it to help users with their data analysis. So maybe there's an area we can learn from them.
Konstantin?
When we look at the fields where there is where you see outcomes on a software basis which are recognized, where people work together, and I'm thinking now, for example, on AstroPy, on the astronomic scientific field, or something like the modeling database in neuroscience, which is hosted in Yale. And so there is a community building within the field where I think a lot of people recognize that they're re-implementing the same thing over and over again. But there must be, I think, a shift in the decision makers, and that's probably the professors or the principal investigators, that not everything needs to be developed at one's institute, but you can actually contribute to other software code and to other data without being always in competition. There is a value in cooperating, and I think as soon as this is recognized, then there is a huge role on RSE, because then you actually need to have something who's managing the code and who's setting up infrastructure for sharing data or code and so on. So I think that the first thing is the shift, and then I think we should also try to provide our small step or push people in this direction, that before reinventing something, try to see if some package which is maybe solving 90% of your problem is already out there, and then contribute to that instead of re-implementing stuff.
What trends in academia will lead to more opportunities for RSEs? And also related to that, some countries have already funding from funders for these kind of positions to be started. But do you know of anyone in the Nordics? Do the Nordics have this kind of opportunity yet? Patrick?
I talked briefly about recognizing the values of RSEs. As research moves to become more multidisciplinary, it puts a higher pressure on researchers to learn many different things. The time it takes to develop a code that can survive from one PhD generation to the next, it's hard to rely solely on postdocs and PhDs for this. This is an entry point where people that can have a more long-term focus are needed, people that can kind of escape the pressure to publish, the pressure of academia, people that stand aside from it a bit, people with these RSE positions. But a trend that I noticed at my local university is that we're used to that we're gathering resources in terms of hardware, but I also think that it might make sense to gather resources in terms of knowledge and expertise, because we don't expect every research group to build their own cluster. And in the same way, we cannot maybe expect every research group to have their own RSEs. I know that many universities already have centralized groups of application experts working in the computer cluster, for example. But what I see in many other places is that there are scattered research engineers and research software engineers, but they are tied to groups and tied to institutions. And these groups cannot grow anymore because there is not an increased demand for their services. But if you centralize these groups, then you have ability to grow larger groups with a larger hierarchy. And it also goes into bigger options of career paths. Because you're a larger group, you can focus in different directions. Either you focus more on the specialist part or more the leading and project management part. And I think that this is a trend that is important. I was first kind of against the idea of centralizing all our infrastructures in our university, but the more I think about it, I think that this is a trend that will be very helpful.
Okay,
So the trends going forward, I see a lot of data being collected in areas like ecology and not only bioinformatics, and many of the fields are now starting to use AI methods, and this is something. Then if an ecologist is trying to use AI, probably they need some help from AI researchers and whatnot. So there's these new technologies like AI that really require specialized expertise and require also lots of computing resources and data management needs to store all the data. That's pushing the needs to new fields, not only bioinformatics.
Ella?
Yeah, you mostly covered what I was planning to say. So indeed, there's a general trend for data-intensive research in any field, also the non-traditional ones, like humanities would be one new area. And also, in addition to data-intensive research, there's trend towards simulations and computing instead of like traditional experimentation. And within Finland, we have this national funding for high-performance computing, and Keijo knows more about that. But there is indeed some plans to establish a national network of research software engineers who would be located in their home universities and home research institutions, but sort of would benefit from the networking on a national level.
Jeremy?
I think both Keo and Ella really covered the aspects that I was going to highlight. But I think, just to expand on that, the particular trends, I think obviously there's a huge growth in computational research. And while I think researchers might traditionally have learnt the kind of the skills and the techniques that they needed to build their own software or to try and handle that side of the research, as everything is growing so much, and as we see these huge increases in data, as Keo mentioned, I think that suddenly researchers find that there's just too much to do to be able to collect the data, to manage the data, to evaluate the outputs and so on, and I think there's huge opportunities for RSEs here.
Gudrun?
Yeah, I can only add briefly that I agree. Also in the synchrotron business, the bottleneck will become the data analysis. And as Patrick said, we need then better tools to handle this. And we cannot expect any researcher to sit in his or her room to do this alone, right? So that I think there's a huge opportunity. And personally, I wish really that this direction will develop and have more opportunity for people.
Now we have talked a lot about RSEs in general. So in your opinion, what do you think defines one? Who isn't one? And what distinctions are actually useful? Gudrun?
So I'm not yet an RSE, but I would imagine that person works very much interdisciplinary, but also knows the software side, but can also understand the science.
Jeremy?
I think for me, an RSE is probably somebody mostly who exactly as Gudrun has said, works in a kind of multidisciplinary environment, but applies software knowledge and software technologies to supporting research. I think the multidisciplinary part is one side. There are obviously RSEs who do focus on specific domains, but I think often we see now with the emergence of RSE groups that they tend to span across different disciplines. But I think that for me the key point is it's somebody who is undertaking software development work to support researchers and to help them to contribute to the research outputs that those researchers produce.
Konstantin?
Yeah, very much second the supporting role. I think that's the defining characteristic. So if you support research with software development or data management, then you are, and if this is the main characteristics of your job, then you are an RSE. But I think there's also we need to make this distinction between an RSE as a full-time job and researchers doing RSE jobs. And I think there are much more researchers which might maybe do 5%, 10% of their time doing some RSE, but they would not identify as an RSE. They identify as a researcher doing RSE as part of their jobs for a limited amount of time. And I think we maybe not reaching out to them as effectively as we could if we say, okay, this is a community for research software engineers, because they're not identified themselves as such.
Now, with the next question, we go a bit back to what we talked about before. What are the trade-offs between having embedded RSEs in research groups and having a centralized RSE group? Is it possible to provide the needed long-term software development when working as software consultants out of a central RSE group? Konstantin.
So we are very much a local group. So we are supporting about 50 persons here. So there's 7 or 8 professors now and PhDs and researchers. And I think we're providing services which would not have been possible on a local group, because we have basically legacy code, and we also want to have consistent support of specific software and data. So this needs to be on a local scale. But the danger here is, of course, that we need to support so many different projects, and that it's we are the group doing this, that there's kind of we starting having ownership of quite a lot of projects and data and software, and it's kind of overwhelming. Whereas if you have maybe a centralized IT or research software engineering group in a university, then it's quite specific that this is a time limited consulting job, and we still struggle a little bit to find the balance in here. So this might be a benefit of having a centralized group, and it's more clear that it's a consulting stuff, and it's not like we taking ownership of a lot of research here.
Jeremy?
I think that RSEs in a central team at one level provide a lot more flexibility. I think there's more flexibility for actually funding the team, because you've got a much wider group of areas that those RSEs can work in. And I think if you've got local RSEs, then of course it very much depends on the funding situation and the work that the group is doing. But of course that then an individual group has probably got to put in a lot more work to find funding for a small one or a small group of local RSEs. But at the same time, I think on the other side of this, there's a problem, or can be a problem, that RSEs in a central team provide much more of a kind of transient presence on projects. So they come into the project, they do some work, and then they disappear. And that might work well in some cases, but I think if you have RSEs in a research group, then there's much more scope for those RSEs to get involved with the work that the group is doing, to learn in much more detail kind of local domain-specific approaches to things. And so there are benefits from that perspective. So I think, there are pros and cons on both sides.
Okay,
Of course, they're centralized and centralized. So, of course, we have also national supercomputing experts. They cannot be then expected to be involved in all of the research projects that are run nationally, even high-scale projects. So definitely you will need local experts. Is that on campus or is it within a particular research group? Then that's a different discussion altogether. So yeah, I think you need a hierarchy of support, and then depending on your needs.
Patrick?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The benefit of a centralized group is also that it's easier to help the smaller groups that can never sustain an RSE themselves. And as a RSE working alone, something I miss from my perspective is a team, somebody to work with, people to share knowledge and experience with. I mean, I'm alone with the researchers kind of, so we can talk about the research and I'm supposed to help them with all the RSE related work, but who helps me with the RSE related work? So that's another benefit. And the drawback, of course, as you mentioned, is that harder to become personalized, to become as involved in a project as a local RSE.
Thank you. And we are nearing the end of this panel session. But one question I'm also personally very interested in: what advice would you give aspiring RSEs? Gudrun.
I would say, from my experience, start early with Python, be interdisciplinary, and attend workshops like the Code Refinery, and then look out for a mentor and or a group that thinks like you, so you can learn from them.
Jeremy?
I would definitely say get engaged with RSE communities, and I think that obviously Nordic RSE and this workshop and the initiative behind it is something that's a great opportunity, I think, for the Nordics. But of course there are similar groups in many other countries, and now there's a lot of international groups as well. So I think whatever area you work in, whether you're focused on data and you kind of engage with something like the Research Data Alliance, or whether you're more on the software side and look at sort of Research Software Alliance and the various RSE communities that are out there, I think there's a huge number of opportunities now to kind of engage with communities that focus on things that you might be interested in. I think that's a great way to build links with people in relevant fields, and to see what opportunities are out there, and to really develop kind of links into the RSE space, which I think is a great way to get going and to build your skills and knowledge as well.
Konstantin?
I would say it's really important that you combine different skills within coding and software development. So do not get fixated on one programming language or on one skill. So you can be the best Fortran programmer, but if there's nobody looking for someone, then you're really stuck in what you're doing or not finding a job anymore. Also, not focus too much on specific programming languages, but on skills. So you should combine something like data visualization, data management, and then switch from one language to another one just to see how this works in other languages, because often the job requires that you do some R, and if you're just doing Python, then it's also not the best way to do. This is one thing. You should maybe have a portfolio of things, and then maybe focus on the stuff which researchers per se are not the best in doing. So they're really good in maybe doing graphs for publications, and they're doing their analysis code, and they're probably good in that. But then as soon as they need an interactive visualization for a web page, and they never have done that. If you are the person doing that, then you really have a job. And as part of this, and this is also really important, the communicating what you're doing in a way which is not software jargon, but which is meeting the researchers, what they understand and what they used to know. So then that's really helpful. So doesn't help if you start talking about microservices for a web app to the researchers. So you have to say how this helps, and this is helps in management, and this helps how you can update the system. So this is the language they understand, and this is a skill you should learn.
Patrick?
I'm an aspiring RSE myself, so I don't know what advice I can offer, but I see a lot of, when I talk to others who are thinking about this career path, I see a lot of insecurity. It can be quite intimidating when you're moving towards being multidisciplinary, in the sense that you have to split your attention maybe between research and computer science, for example. And if you come from a research background, you think, oh, well, I'm not as good as the best computer scientists. And the more time you focus on computer science, you then lag behind in research. So you're playing catch up with them. But don't be intimidated about this. Be brave instead. Because if you turn it around and think that, oh, well, I'm probably better than the researchers at the computer science part, and I'm probably better than the computer scientist at the research part. Well, if that's the case, then you're already home. Yeah, be brave. Don't be intimidated, and don't fall for the imposter syndrome that most of us probably experience at some point.
Thank you very much, everyone. That was really inspiring.
Well, I hope you found that inspiring too. In the next 2 episodes, we will talk about the Julia programming language, and I hope to see you then. And for now, goodbye.